Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Talking Acquisition. This is the weekly high-energy, informative, and slightly opinionated view on all things acquisition, procurement, and government contracting related. This is the place where the contracting community, the acquisition community, and our industry partners connect, talk, listen, and learn from each other. My name is William Randolph, and I am your host, and I'd like to introduce my co-host, my colleague, my partner, my friend, Soraya Carrera. Hello, Soraya.
Hello, Will. How are you today?
I am great. I'm great. How's your week?
Great. Keeping busy. I like the way you keep saying slightly opinionated, like people don't know we're opinionated.
Yeah, the word's out by now.
Exactly. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm going to start off with our disclaimer because we have a very special guest today, and I'm anxious to get him going on the conversation.
All right, let's do it.
So, our podcast shares information and views on a variety of topics that impact the federal acquisition community. Our goal is to provide thought leadership and perspective, not to criticize, judge, or render political opinions. We provide this free service because we are former federal acquisition professionals and leaders. We believe that the creativity, innovation, and effectiveness of our community is unleashed when we share knowledge, information, and learning. We hope you enjoy our podcast, and we welcome the views and comments of our colleagues across the private and public sectors. So now I get the great pleasure of introducing someone who I had the pleasure of working with for several years, got to know him very well, and I'm glad that he's still my friend and my colleague out here. His name is Chip Fulgham, or I should say the Honorable Chip Fulgham. Chip served as the Deputy Undersecretary for Management at the Department of Homeland Security, and prior to that, he was the CFO, and he was the Budget Director. And prior to that, he was in the U.S. Air Force, rising to the rank of colonel. He served for 28 years in the Air Force. And more importantly, Chip used to love to remind us that he was part of that little group of actings, right? He served as acting Undersecretary for Management and acting Deputy Secretary, I believe, on 2 separate occasions. But what I like to say about Chip was he was a great leader and ardent supporter of our business processes, focused on mission and customer, all those things that we believe in. Today, Chip is the Chief Operating Officer of Endeavors, and I'm going to turn it over to Chip to tell us a little bit about what Endeavors is and what he does over there. Over to you, Chip, and welcome.
Thanks very much, Raya, and thanks for having me, and thanks for that kind introduction. The check's in the mail for you, for those nice words. And right back at you in terms of the amount of respect I have for Soraya and the leadership that she provided in the acquisition community, in my opinion, was unmatched. And I don't say it because she's on here with me, but there was no better procurement officer in my 35 years of government service. And so it's a pleasure to be here today. I am currently sitting out in San Antonio, Texas, where Endeavors is headquartered. Endeavors is a faith-based national nonprofit. We've been around for going on 52 years now. We have 4 lines of service, and we're very fortunate to be able to be in a position to serve vulnerable populations in crisis. We serve the homeless, in particular, homeless women with children who have suffered from some form of mental illness. We're able to help folks with disabilities find employment. We serve veterans and their families throughout the state of Texas, not only helping them if they become homeless, but also helping post 9/11 veterans with mental health who've suffered from some form of mental health issue. We have a large rapid deployment capability and have served throughout the state of Texas, particularly during COVID, helping cities deal with those vulnerable populations impacted by COVID. We do a lot of disaster recovery work, and then we are integral in helping the government deal with surges along the border with our migrant service operation. So I feel very privileged to be here. It's just another way to serve and try to give back. And I feel blessed to be a part of an organization. We're about 2,000 folks strong. Wow. And very fortunate to be here. So I look forward to the conversation. and talking about what's going on today as it relates in particular to the fact that, surprise, surprise, you're under another continuing resolution
Surprise.
at DHS and the federal government.
Thank you, Chip, and thank you for your service, not only throughout your federal and military service, but also what you're doing there at Endeavor. So definitely a very noble cause, and they're lucky to have you there, and we certainly miss you here. But that said, one of the reasons I thought you would be an ideal guest is because I know you have no opinions. I know that you are very self-controlled about that. But with your extensive knowledge and background, you certainly have seen the entire acquisition lifecycle. You've been a part of the business processes that we not only inherited, but we also honed and improved at the investment decisions in the programs that they serve. So I thought, we'd turn to you and have you talk a little bit about that acquisition life cycle from, how that budget process at the very high level, that budget process and the impacts of the different decisions that are made throughout the life cycle as we get to the portion of the program that is procurement and getting something on contract to serve our users.
Yeah, so I think the thing I realized most is that in the government, there's a need for speed. So the acquisition process isn't necessarily built for speed. And so one of the things that we worked very hard on when I was at DHS was trying to streamline the entire acquisition process. And if you're ever bored, of course, you can go out and read about the numerous failed acquisitions in DHS and other agencies. And 9 times out of 10, the reason they failed was because of a lack of a good requirements process up front, making sure that you knew exactly what it is you needed. Oftentimes people had gone to a preconceived solution before you even go through the needs assessment process. So, we set up the joint requirements process at DHS to help evaluate that, but at the same time, do it rapidly. Right. So you're trying to serve a couple of masters. One, you have a need for speed. 2, you want to get the most out of the taxpayers' money. So you don't want to duplicate an effort going on in one aspect of the department that's going on somewhere else. You want to leverage that. I think from there, what we tried to do was one of the other parts that really held up the process was cost estimating. Right. So my experience when I was a CFO was if you said the word cost estimate, you were looking at 6 months. And, in my view, you only had 3 options when it came to, because mostly you're trying to buy a piece of software in the department. So you're either going to build it yourself, you're going to get it off the shelf, or going to have some hybrid. So it didn't make a lot of sense to me why it took us 6 months to figure out what that was going to cost. And so we did some things to shrink that part of the timeline down. The sheer documentation, if you remember DHS, acquisition process was born from DOD's process. And, we weren't buying aircraft carriers. And so a lot of the documentation that was required, you really didn't need to really have that much of, or that robust of documentation. So, I think we reduced that by almost a third. And then so as you got to making a decision, then it's about how you're going to deliver the software and all the cool terms of agile and all, all of those terms. But really what it was trying to get to a product as quickly as you could that was viable. And making sure you've got if you got the requirements up front, the procurement community can go deliver what it is you want if they know what you're talking about. I think the other thing that we did pretty well was involve procurement, making sure that the chief procurement officer had a seat at the table from start to finish. One of the things that you taught me was if you'll just bring me in before you're ready to go get it, and let us do a little planning, we can make up ground and help deliver a product faster. As far as the CFO goes and their part in the acquisition process. I think the challenge was how to marry up the budget process with the acquisition life cycle, because the budget process, that train never stops. It just keeps going down the track. And so well, I take that back. It stops about 3 or 4 times. And so if you're not able to jump on, then you got to go to the next stop. And if you miss that stop, the chances are you're going to have to go back and wait for the train to come around again. And so that was always a challenge, is trying to marry up the budget and programming process with the acquisition life cycle. But from my perspective, because of some very smart people there, we were able to make some progress in terms of shrinking the acquisition life cycle down, which is the ultimate goal, because you're trying to deliver capability to the operator out in the field as fast as you can, but as cost effectively as you can.
So Chip, you brought up a couple questions. You got a couple thoughts from me. First is when you mentioned acquisition life cycle, and I am curious, as an executive in a 2,000 member organization, what does your acquisition process look like in your organization? I'd like to just, because we always think in government that private industry has it solved. What is that? What are your views on what does the acquisition life cycle to service and support the care and feeding of a 2,000 member organization and its mission? What does it look like for you?
Oh, so that's an excellent question, because, the private sector's got everything figured out. If only the government knew how to do it. So what's interesting in the private sector is in an organization like this one, when I got here, there really was no process. So it was what I call the shiny brochure process. So if some vendor came to you and said, hey, look at this, this is really cool, I think you need this. If they wanted to buy it, they could go buy it. And so we did that a couple of times before I got here with our case management solution. And lo and behold, the brochure didn't do exactly what it said. And lo and behold, we didn't necessarily know what our requirements were. So believe it or not, we built a process here. It's not as formalized, and we don't have all the gates that the government does.
Sure.
But we basically, what we really wanted to make sure is that we got the most bang for the buck in terms of getting all the requirements down, getting them up front, evaluating them and scoring them, and weighting them based on most important to least important. And then once you did that, now you can have a bake off between vendors, right? And get down and make a decision. But we experienced the same challenges that the government experiences in terms of requirements creep, in terms of not fully identifying what it is you need, not doing enough in terms of discovery up front, and just trying to hurry up and get to the end. So, and all the change management, all those things that you need to successfully acquire and bring on board a system are true out here. We just can be as formal or as informal as we want to be.
Got it.
Yeah. And so what I've tried to do real quick, what we've really tried to do is not over bureaucratize it, right? We have a simple, like 3 or 4 page standard operating procedure for acquiring software.
Right.
It gives enough of a framework that makes sure that there's discipline in the process. I think the other thing for an organization our size, real quick, is that one of the biggest things you need in acquisition is a program management office.
Yes.
And so when you're buying a case management system that goes off over 4 disparate lines of service, trying to find someone to lead that effort and keep it on schedule and making sure that all those 4 lines of service needs are met, that's a big challenge for an organization like us, because we don't have that program management capability that's so inherent inside the government.
That's a really good point. That's a great description. So, talking about a little bit about the budget process and how it influences the overarching acquisition process. Can you shed a little bit of light? You talked a little bit about the Joint Requirements Council. What do you think was the most important aspect of what the JRC was doing in terms of the discipline that it brought to the process?
Well, I think what it should be doing is identifying true needs and scrubbing those needs. And then two, helping the department help itself in terms of duplication. I used to say this to vendors all the time. I said, you guys are more than willing for us to write 9 checks.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking at us, and sometimes I think you shake your head at us because you're like, if you guys want a contract for it 9 times, go ahead. We'll put the overhead and G&A on 9 of them, and you can pay for that, or you can try to figure out where there is like needs and do it one time and serve multiple masters. The problem with that is, of course, as you guys know, like in DHS, is everyone's special and everyone's unique. Soraya and her team led the league in strategic sourcing vehicles, where you had gone out and tried to build contracting vehicles that could serve multiple masters. The usage rate on those was something different, right? Because again, I want to go write my own contract for my own thing because I'm special, because I'm ICE or CB, like the ICE guy there. I'm special because I'm ICE, or I'm special because I'm CBP. So I think the Joint Requirements Council, from a requirement standpoint, was helping them, but you've got to have sustained focus and discipline to keep it going. And I don't know where it is today, but it's necessary. From that, I think those were the 2 of the most important things it did or tried to do.
Awesome. So Chip, I want to get poignant here for just a second. I want to play Miss Don't Miss. What's the thing that you miss from your time in government? And what's the thing you don't miss from your time in government? Miss Don't Miss.
So what I miss is people. People like Soraya, people like you, people like Stacy Marcotte, Angela Bailey, who just retired. That list goes on and on and on. I miss those people, and because they're so dedicated to the cause, and to the mission. And public service gets such a bad rap, and it's just they just don't know. It's out of ignorance. Those people work night and day, weekends, to deliver the mission to the American people. So I miss that the most. What I don't miss, and you asked me, so I'm going to tell you, Washington, D.C. is too mean-spirited now. And collateral damage means nothing to what goes on inside the Beltway. And it's all about absolutism, and it's all about winning and losing, and that's all that matters. We've lost the ability to govern, and the government was built on compromise, and frankly, the government was built on inefficiency. You wouldn't build 3 branches of something to overlook one another, right?
Right.
So it was built on inefficiency, and it was built on compromise, which means whenever you compromise, everybody should walk out a little dissatisfied. But you can't compromise today, because it's all about, I am absolutely right and you are absolutely wrong. And if I try to move, it's at my own peril. And I think the other thing I would say that I don't miss is it's personal now. So back in the day, it used to be you and I could be on opposite ends of the spectrum, but that was professionally. Absolutely. And, it would be okay to still be your friend. I'm not sure it'd be okay to be your friend now if we're on opposite ends of the spectrum. Yeah. So I don't miss any of that.
Good stuff. Well, Thank you.
More than you bargained for, but
no, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
No, I think that's perfect. And that ties to, many times that we've talked about that relationship, the importance of the relationships, the importance of, working with your peers, with those above you, those, those relationships of your employees, your peers, your managers, and reaching outside of the organization. I was very big on industry government working together. And certainly you were a champion of that as well. You were always open to meeting with companies and going out and talking to companies about what we were doing. And I have to agree with you. It's the art of compromise, because even when we talk about requirements and when we talk about, cutting the deal, writing the contract, part of that is just that. It's, let's reach an agreement. Let's figure out how we make this thing work. And one of the things that we often, forget to talk about when we're talking about the acquisition lifecycle is the whole contract administration piece. Once we award that contract, we all know life is changing as we're going along. You started the solicitation, 6 months, 9 months, sometimes a year ago, sometimes 2 years ago, depending on the protest process. And now it's time to deliver. And companies do run into trouble because they can't deliver what they thought they would be able to, or the government has changed its requirements. So, I agree with you. It's all about those relationships, and it's those relationships that cause you to solve problems. And the more tension that you put into the system, the less likely you are to achieve success. One of the questions one of the topics, I love the fact that you call it the inefficiency of government, that the government was built to be inefficient. Talk a little bit about that, because, when you think about things like CRs and all the different things that we go through, and I think the CR is probably the most inefficient process. And it's a process that was created for those who cannot get their job done. I'm sorry, I have to say it that way. Bill knows I'm a little emotional about that.
So I think our founding fathers built some inherent inefficiency in because of checks and balances. Mm-hmm. One of the things that they also envisioned is that the power of the purse string resides with the Congress, and at the top of their job jar is to fund the United States
budget, yeah,
right. So when I say it was built to be inefficient, that's along the lines of checks and balances. It was never built to be paralyzed, and CRs paralyzed the government. I experienced, a CR every year I was at DHS, and for most years I was at when I was in the United States Air Force. And what it does is it does several things. One, it severely constrains spending, which is, I think, an indirect goal of passing CRs is because they can't compromise and get to a budget. This is a way to constrain spending because you're on daily spending rates. But what most people don't realize is that CRs cause enormous inefficiency in an agency because you have to plan for a shutdown. And that doesn't mean, hey, we'll just send a note out to our employees and tell them, hey, you might be here, you might not be here. You have to figure out which contracts on the contracting side are government essential, mission essential, which ones aren't, which ones have multi-year funding and may have funding, which ones don't. And then you have to go issue all these mods, administrative mods, and incrementally fund something that wasn't designed to be incrementally funded. So on the contractor side, because we've experienced it now, what that does is create inefficiency and paralysis on the contract side. There may be things you want to do as it relates to your contractual agreement, but you're like, I don't know if I'm going to be around too much from now. So I think there's huge inefficiency from that point. And the fact that you have to prepare for that shutdown. When I was at DHS, I think we had 4 or 5 at least. Those take years to recover from, not months, years. Not only to catch up with the billing, because all those administrative functions that people just go, they're not essential. The government needs to pay its bills and contract for services, and all those people are at home. So when they're brought back, they've got to catch up. And the impact of that paralysis on the program is felt for years to come. So, I would just implore the powers that be to pass a budget. I mean, it's job number one. If you or I here at Endeavors, if my number one job was to get a budget, and every year I went to our board of directors and go, I didn't do it. I'm going to get it in about 4 or 5 months, but I didn't do it. So we're just going to limp along. I would be out on the street. I mean, that's just how it goes. So it's grossly inefficient. And I don't believe people outside the community that's probably listening to this understand the impact on the contracting community, because a lot of the money is 1 year money. So it's not that your people are wasting money at the end of the year, which is the narrative, right? No, they're not. They're trying to catch up and speed up to execute what should have been given to them in October and was given to them in March, in a lot of cases. So it's not that people are wasting money and looking for things to spend money on. Is that they're trying to catch up. And at the same time, you're trying to do that. By the time they catch up in June or July, she's got to turn around and not only execute the end of the year, but turn around and get ready for the next year. So I always had a lot of empathy for our contracting counterparts, because they really bore the brunt of the inefficiency of government.
Awesome.
And I appreciate the description you gave, because it does impact the contractor community. I talk about it often that a lot of people think it's just the government. No, it's not. It impacts the contractors. You can't plan. You lose people because people get nervous when they think they're not going to get a paycheck, that they're not going to get paid. And no matter what Congress says, oh yeah, we think we're going to pay you, until that paycheck's coming through the door. And some people live paycheck to paycheck, so they can't afford to wait the 30, 60, whatever number of days it takes to catch up on payments. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Will, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. So Chip, it sounded like from your description of your organization and its mission, you may have government contracts. Is that?
We do.
All right, great. So the following question is, if there was a messaging that you'd like to share with our community about the experiences that you all are having with government now that you sit on the other side of the table, any lessons learned, any aha moments, any insights that you'd like to share about what that engagement or that interaction looks and feels like today?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, we are the tip of the tail of the dog. So we are, we are way out at the end of this food chain. And the government contracting community is overworked and underappreciated. And because of that, they don't communicate. And I would also, as well as they want to, number one. Number two, they're very risk averse. And so the communication is very sterile, and it's, very, right down the line.
Yeah.
And three, incrementally funding an organization like us is difficult, because it creates all the things you just said. People are like, are we going to be here or not?
Yeah.
And so if there's a way to better facilitate communication between the contracting, understand the rules, but just better communication, one, and there has to be some level of trust. I used to always, and Soraya will tell you this, I would always talk about DHS's mission statement. And I would always say the we comprises of three things. It comprises the military personnel in the Coast Guard, the civilians who work in the department, and the contractors who support the mission. And you can't get it done without the triad. And we just have this idea of contractors as second-class citizens, and a lot of times they're treated that way, and you're at the mercy of the government, and so you just swallow. But I think treating them as a valued partner, which is something I know Soraya pushed very hard for, and instilled in her folks, I think is something that would help the folks on the other side.
Awesome. That's amazing. Thank you so very much. I had some assumptions that maybe where you were you could go, but yes, you reinforced those, that communication, risk, and value partner, very valuable aspects. Soraya, last word. We're getting close, so you want to?
Okay. See, he's getting ready to give me the big shut up, Soraya. Can't talk anymore. I was good. Did you notice? I'm not hogging the conversation.
I know. Do you see the look of awe in my? No, she knows I love it.
So just a couple of things. First of all, yeah, I totally agree with what you said. I keep harping on the relationships, building those relationships, ensuring you maintain those relationships, and recognizing the partnerships, the value of all the partnerships, whether they're internal, external, or even the partnerships with the oversight organizations, because that is one of the things that I think we also did well at DHS, Chip, when you were there, as well as the follow-ons, the folks that have followed behind you, that we've tried to build strong working relationships with the oversight organizations so that there could be back and forth communications. And that's why sometimes some of the later failures, the failures that may have happened under our watch, the errors that may have been committed, were not as painful and weren't dragged out as much as perhaps some of the earlier failures, because we did have those relationships, we managed those conversations, and we did talk about the risks, right? The risks that we were willing to assume, how we mitigated those risks. We were in a proactive mode, identifying risks and saying, so what if this happens? What are we going to do? So I think, the discussion about relationships, creating that trust, that environment of we're all equal partners and we're all valued and everybody plays a part in this is extremely important. And so I applaud that, and I agree with you. And I do have to say that as one of the leaders of the organization, you really understood what it meant to say, we're going to buy some risks. We're going to take some risks because this mission merits that we take that risk. That in order to achieve the mission, sometimes you have to take certain risks. And you just got to be smart about which risks you're going to take and how you're going to manage them.
Awesome. Okay. And with that, folks, we're at our golden nugget point. We want to leave the community, the various communities that we serve and represent. We want to leave the community with one golden nugget. So our guest, Chip, would you like to give us our first golden nugget? Do you have a golden nugget that you'd like to leave for the community?
I don't know if it's a golden nugget. You might describe it as something else when I finish. But, to what Soraya just said, I think as leaders, the biggest thing that we can do is, one, provide that transparency, right, that she just talked about. That goes a long way to building relationships with whoever you're dealing with. True, two, if you're going to take risk, you got to own it. So, one of the things that Soraya and I did was when we looked at some different ways to do contracting and procurement, and they didn't go well, people are risk averse because they're like, who's going to be left holding the bag? And, I'll never forget the time that Soraya and I stood up and said, no, it's on us. I own that. Our folks performed amazingly well. Some things went right, some things didn't go right, and we'll learn from it. But you got to own that. And then the third thing is, I would say you don't learn anything through success. You learn through failure, but that requires strong leadership, and it's especially challenging when you've got all those Monday morning quarterbacks and oversight agencies that are evaluating you. But if you want to be successful, you've got to take risk, and you've got to be willing to look at how to do things differently and innovate. I'd love to come back and talk to you about Soraya's Procurement Innovation Lab, and what we learned along the way, and how folks really got excited once they realized, hey, someone's got my back and I'm going to be okay if I try it and it doesn't work. So I guess that would be my nugget is, take one thing you've learned recently or one innovation you've heard about and go try it.
Good stuff. Awesome.
And if it works, great. If it doesn't work, evaluate why it didn't work and learn from it.
Absolutely. Soraya?
Okay.
Your
well,
nugget?
My favorite nugget, which is leaders have to lead. And that means that you support your people. You stand with them when it's good or bad. You like to say plant the flag, right, Will? I say wave the flag. In other words, go out there and champion your people, no matter what's going on, support them, be part of them, and our contractors too. I often try to take time to thank the contractors for what they did. to remind them that I knew they were out there and that they were part of our community. So I really think leaders lead, and that's how we lead, by encouraging, motivating, inspiring people to do more and respecting them and using those two little words that sometimes we don't use enough in the English language, and that is thank you. To say thank you to the people that do the job every single day.
Awesome. And my nugget is going to bounce a little bit off of a comment you made, Chip, about the mean-spiritedness that tends to be in the atmosphere these days. And my nugget is simply this: those relationships that you can control them. They don't have to be mean-spirited. You might get mean-spirited from top, maybe political, maybe, in various areas, but the relationships that you have 100% control over, control them. They don't have to be mean-spirited. So, and the best activity comes from a solid relationship.
Can I say one other thing?
Absolutely.
Hang up. I think the other thing I would say is, and you both just are saying that, but people matter.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if you just live by some simple rules of, treat people the way you want to be treated, I think we need to go back to some more compassion and empathy with our peers, with our bosses, with the people that work for us. And if you show some compassion and you show a little empathy, especially during this time, right? When, I don't think any of us don't know someone that didn't lose someone from COVID. And, what people are going through, trying to work and be a parent and be a teacher, their dogs running around and people are at the door, all of these things going on, they're trying to get the job done. I just think that, if you just always remember that, hey, try to put yourself in their shoes and lead from that angle,
Awesome.
and treat people the way you want to be treated. We go a long way to making the world a little bit better place.
Most definitely.
Can't get a better wrap up than that.
Exactly.
Chip, thank you so very much for your time. Thank you for your presence, your insights, and for sharing with us. And with that, Soraya, you want to call it a day?
I just want to say thank you again, Chip. It's always a privilege to be with you, to talk to you. I'm so glad that we've continued our relationship post-employment, that you still even like me. Because I used to drive them nuts. So I'm gonna tell you, I was right, Chip.
I don't like Soraya. I love Soraya.
But we always found a way to get it done, and it was always
right.
a privilege to work with you. And I certainly enjoy seeing you. And thank you for what you're doing there at Endeavors. That's great. And Will, as always, it's a privilege to talk acquisition with you. And with
All
that,
right.
I think we have ourselves a wrap.
It's a wrap. Be well.
Be well.
Thank you.